Okay, let's talk about lighting. So we need to get our scenes to start looking good. I'm starting to get requests from people. Why is my scene so dark and whatnot? So we got to figure out how to make this look better. So there's several things at play to make your scene look cool. Now mine's pretty darn bright right now for a night scene because I've been trying to work in it. So I've kind of boosted some values in my lighting to make it work. If you're not aware, G on your keyboard will hide and unhide all the helper items around your scene. So I'm just unhiding my lights here. So first thing we can start with is the actual sky dome. So this is an actual sky dome up here. If I look up into this abyss this way and press Alt-2 to go to wireframe, you can literally see that we are surrounded by a sphere and we're inside of that sphere. The material that is on it is literally just sort of a set of materials that are controlled by gradient ramps and whatnot, and settings and things that blend together a pile of textures and make it possible to have the clouds moving and change it from night to day and whatnot. So that's the first one you're probably going to want to mess with. Just so you know, you're not going to see these three swatches here. These are things I've exposed in the current blueprint that drives all this. You might want to, I find it sometimes works well, but there's a directional light actor here. You might want to change this right away to clear and just clear it so it says none. Um, it ties itself to a light in the scene, and I find it almost more difficult to get what I want because I want something specific. So I tend to clear that. So that means some of these settings like sun brightness and whatnot no longer function because it was directly controlling your light. Um, let's scroll on down to the override settings. Sun height is going to give you the night or day settings. So up to 1, you're basically having a sun somewhere up in the sky. I'm trying to find it. I don't know where it's gone. There's actually a dot for the light for the sun. I'll, whoops, horizon fall off. I mean to rotate this one. It's there somewhere. Anyways, wherever it's gone, there's a little dot that's shown as the sun, probably because I have the sun brightness down. Let's take that back up and see if we can find this sun dot again. There it is down here. So you can see the dot that's being drawn on there that kind of represents the sun. It's not a light per se, but it's a nice hot spot that it's self-illuminating, so it looks like a sun. And so when we're at 1, the sun's directly above. We'll call that, noon, sort of time, and take it right down to -1, and it's down below us, and it's in the bottom of the sphere now, so down below our set, and we're at nighttime. So yeah, it's kind of like the sun going around the world. Yeah, it's possible to actually animate this too if you know how. So what you'll notice is that what I've done is I've actually kind of lined up my sphere to line up to the orientation of my main light. So when I select this, I'm just going to clear my world outliner. This is my directional light in the scene. It doesn't really matter where this is. It fills the entire scene. So just like in Arnold, essentially, it's a directional light coming down. And I've kind of lined up the sun in line with this so that if I do put it in daytime, it looks like I've got a sun in the sky there. Now, the way you can do that is simply by selecting your sky sphere and use your rotate and rotate it around this way. So I've just simply kind of tried to line it up so that if I look down that arrow coming out of my light, somewhere there, I guess, I can line it up so it is kind of pointing down through that same angle, so it looks like that's the sun. You could also then put it up at the right similar sort of angle. In this case it would have to go up if it was a daytime shot. Now what I'm trying to do is get more of a moon lit night kind of shot, but I'll leave it on daylight here because it probably makes more sense with my current lighting. So that is the BP sky sphere that you're going to have to adjust. Now you can also change some of the colors. You can play with the cloud colors and overall colors and whatnot. It'll make changes to the look and feel of it. So let's move that now on to our light, and this is the main directional light that we're using. So the main directional light has an intensity, And so we can turn that up and down, but of course cranking that up is going to just blow things out and it's going to look horrendous. So you got to be a little careful with that. So, careful where you're setting it. I've got mine right now around a 12 or something, but depending on scene scale or whatever what you're going for, maybe it might look a little different. Actually, scene scale wouldn't matter. It looks like I probably need it even lower. Um, it's just way too bright at this point. But we can see that we've got, pretty dark shadows and everything. So there's some settings in here that are going to help, control some of that. So let me move over to an empty level now, and we'll set it up from scratch so you can see how each one of them affects it. My scene here is so complicated, it's hard to really know what's going on because I have a lot of things happening in this scene now to light it. So I'll be right back. So I have this small level here. It looks like there's nothing in it. I'm just going to go Alt-3, which is taking me over to the unlit settings so you can see what I've got. The only thing you could actually visually see here was the self-illuminating wood that's sort of burning that I threw in there just to show that self-illuminating textures will actually not need light. They basically just light themselves. Okay, so that's the emissive channel that is being used in the material. So what we want to do then is we want to set up some lights in this and start putting in lights. Now, the first thing I don't have here is I don't have my BP Sky Sphere, so I'm going to go look for that and just go BP, and we'll find that in this list. So BP Sky Sphere. I'm going to drag that out. And when I drag it out, I want to make sure it's zeroed out to the center. So I'm just going to hit this reset to default button and it'll stick us in the middle here. So I've got this sky now, and we can see we've got the sun over there somewhere. So let's just put that on a bit of an angle. I'm just going to grab my BP Sky Sphere and I'm going to rotate that around. So I've got my sun over here somewhere. I can also then go ahead and raise that up and move that light up a little bit so it's coming down. Now you'll notice when we look at the scene, it's a little brighter, but it's not actually. There's no light per se. It looks like it's brighter because the sky's really bright, but we really can't see anything. So this thing really doesn't output light so much. We can play around with some settings and try and make it look like it's lit, and it probably adds a little bit of glow to the scene, but it's not going to do a whole lot for us. So we need something to fake the light in there. So I'm just going to clear my search here, and I'm going to go into the lights section here, and we can drag out a directional light. Now with that directional light, it really doesn't matter where it is. You'll see that it makes no difference to the scene whatsoever if I move it around as far as lighting goes. Okay, the shadow angle's not changed or anything. It's purely just needs to be somewhere in the scene. I like sticking it up above the scene, just somewhere just above zero, so I kind of know where to go and find it if I want to look for it. We can rotate it to get the sun angle looking more interesting. Don't just accept the defaults. Make your scene look cool, right? So we can rotate that around. We can also change the angle of the sun, and whether it's pointing up or down and whatnot, and that can be done, I believe. Okay, I think I'm mistaken. I don't think you can change it in a setting here. I thought you could. I might be thinking of something else. Easiest way to do it is change over to local. So we're rotating in local mode, and you can see it pointing along that local. So you can change how high your sun is in the sky, essentially, whether you're sort of noon or down lower in the sky. So again, what I try and do is set this up so it's coming from the same sort of angle as the sun. I'm going to change that back to global lighting, which is control tilde, and so that I can rotate it and get it sort of coming from where the sun in the sky is. And so that's my lighting now. So we got this really harsh lighting. It's really, really black. I got objects that are pointing away from the light that are just not getting lit. The back edges of it here are looking terrible. And of course it says lighting needs to be rebuilt. This is something you've got to do for everything if you understand your lighting. So what does this mean again? So mobility, we talked about this in other videos. Currently it's set to static. That means that this light will light objects that are static and movable. So it'll handle real-time lighting and baked in lighting. All of my objects in this case are, I think they're all set to stationary, but realistically they should all be, and I was messing around with this, so they should all be on this static lighting. So we want to bake all this stuff. Nothing's going to change in our scene. So I want to make sure that my objects in the scene are being handled by lighting that is static. Now, if things are in a blueprint like some of the stuff I've got here, you're going to find it's got to be set internally in the object. But so we want to make sure that all things are being handled by static lighting. The reason being is again, we want to be able to bake. So Control Shift and colon or semicolon, however that's going to be on that key, will take you into your lighting build, and it'll build it up for you really fast on a level like this because there's nothing in it, and that message will go away. Now, the reason you need to really build your lighting fairly often, especially as you get started, is that there are more calculations going on in the lighting build than just the real world lighting. So we need to make sure that we're really getting what we expect to see. We're also going to find out in the message log if there's any errors on any of our materials as we do this. It'll come up with a message in the corner and tell you there's errors. Click on it, it'll pop this message log open. Well, if you go to Window, Developer Tools, there's the message log right there. I just dock it to the bottom, and my output log as well I use. That gives me other information and whatnot, but your message log will tell you whether or not there's errors or problems with certain objects, and you need to pay attention to this message log. You will get all kinds of errors as you're building and starting to understand how this functions. So the next thing we really need is some sort of fill lighting. So we're going to go with a skylight. I'm going to drag that in the scene. And again, it really doesn't matter where this is. I like to stick it up by my, my sunlight sort of thing. And so we can play with it from there. So what the skylight is just like an Arnold, in 3ds Max or a Maya or whatever, or settings that are in Blender. This gives us the ability to add sort of bounce lighting, the ambient light in the scene. Intensity scale will give us that ability to dial that up and down. It's a really jumpy spinner, so maybe we can try 20, 10, 5, and get it to a point where it feels right. Don't just blow your scene out. Depends what kind of time of day you're going for and what the rest, is the sky going to be cloudy or anything else. We can play with those settings. And so I'm just going to go with something like a 4 right now in this scene. And it looks like it's sort of lighting up the dark areas a bit more. So it's filling things in. Now, something else to note, our shadows are pretty strong and straight here, and it's not very interesting as far as the shadows go. They'll be very harsh. So we need to adjust some of that as well. So indirect lighting intensity, this will control, I believe, some of the sort of the soft light. So if you roll it over it, it'll give you an idea as to what's going on. So this is controlling the GI, global illumination. That happens when it's getting baked. Volumetric scattering we're going to come back to, and a whole pile of other settings like whether or not it's going to cast dynamic shadows and whatnot. And this is going to handle speed things, cast volumetric shadows. So there's all kinds of things that we can be controlling in here. Okay, for now that's pretty good. Let's go back to the main light, our directional light, and our source angle. I believe this is the one I'm looking for. Indirect intensity again, this is going to be our GI, so let's go to that one first. Let's increase a little bit of GI maybe. We'll come back to the volumetric scattering. Down in the light mass, we can control the amount of sort of spread of the light to soften the edges of our shadows. So I'm just going to crank it way up, and I think the shadow exponent needs to go up as well a bit, and turn on use area shadows for static lighting. This is going to give you nice quality sort of area shadows that are going to be soft on the edge for baked objects only. So only if things are getting baked. Once again, you're going to see lighting needs to be built, and that's because our lighting's changed or something's moved in the scene. Control Shift colon. So you can see now as I've cranked up some of those values, our shadows are much softer on the edges. So I just kind of push those values way too high, but it is giving us this nice diffused kind of look. So if you've got a sun that is low in the sky, your lighting becomes more diffused because the sun is passing on a sharper angle through the atmosphere. It's passing through more atmosphere. Of course, if there was high humidity or lots of water in the air, being created by early morning or evening, and you got that foggy look, it even diffuses the light more, and our shadows become less and less crisp. Noon on, August, middle of the day, down near the equator. You've got the sun directly overhead. You look at your shadows, they're going to be straight down and they're going to be harsh. They're going to be really, really hard because the sun's coming straight through the atmosphere. It's burned off any moisture in the air, and you've got these really hard shadows. So, depending on where you are in the world, time of day, and what you're trying to portray, you need to consider what your lighting's going to look like because it's going to help sell the story of the piece that you're working with. So we've got our light. Let's see, I cranked up the light source angle. I'll take that back down again, maybe to something a little bit better, and immediately it's going to tell me it needs to be baked. Let's bake and see what that light source angle looks like baked now. So our shadows are a little crisper, I think. You can see there's a little more transition from one to the other. If we really wanted to see what happens and how these things are being affected, if you simply go into your main light and turn it down completely, take the intensity scale to 0, you're going to see what happens to the shadows and their edges a little bit better. So sometimes it's better to bake sort of as you get used to things, one thing at a time, and understand what you're getting. I'm just going to take the intensity back up. And so now we've got this, reasonably soft lighting happening. So what we might want to do now is do a little bit of overall adjustment. So often in your images, say in Photoshop, but as you move forward in this program, you're going to be using compositing applications. You'll be taking final renders and passing them through compositing, where you can do post effects on them or post changes to the overall look and feel of the environment. We can do the same thing here, and we need to go in and get another node to add to the scene. So under Visual Effects tab on the side, you can see we have a post-process volume. I'm going to go drop that in the scene. Now the post-process volume basically handles everything inside of it, but we can also make it infinite so that right now it's only going to affect things that are inside of this volume area. I find that to be a little bit of a pain. So we're going to go and we can adjust the scale it or whatever we want. I'm just going to put it up with my lights so I kind of know where it is again, because I'm not that concerned with where it's going to be, because in here I'm going to go look for what is it? Infinite extent unbound. So we're going to look for that infinite extent unbound and just turn that on, because this is going to give us a post effect for the entire scene. Now you could actually put this around an individual object if you want, or objects, or inside of a room if you want to change the effects inside of that room so it looks different inside somewhere else. So you can leave it so it's only based on the volume. So there's all of these settings here. I'm just going to close them all up. So you've got piles and piles of settings you can work with. So one of them right off the bat is exposure. So you can actually adjust the overall exposure of the scene by changing your exposure compensation. And it's going to up and down the exposure of the scene. Now we're going to set some sort of method for that. And I'm trying to figure out why it's not actually doing anything. Apply to physical camera. There we go. I had it set on game settings in the viewport here, and it wasn't handling it. So we need to make sure that is on. So now we can adjust our overall brightness of our scene, so we can lighten it and darken it. Now this again is just a post process. It's happening after everything else has happened, so we can make global adjustments to the scene here. Another one that's really nice is, again, if you're trying to do night scenes or whatever else you're trying to control, how it sort of looks and feels. We can actually go to things like color temperature, and you notice I can take it into the warms, I can take it into the cools. So if you're trying to create a look and feel of night or whatever else, you can literally just use the temperature. 6500 is the standard temperature for lighting. But you can also start to push and pull, saturation, contrast. Any of these can be turned on and off to manipulate the overall look of the scene. We can even start to create lens flares and other fun stuff to be able to make it look cool. Bloom is another one that can look kind of interesting, and it'll allow things that are hot, sort of in the color spectrum, or in the value spectrum, to glow almost, to produce that sort of that hazy look. And so if we're going for that sort of hazy look and feel, the bloom intensity will help make that sort of the lighting solutions or hot spots, things that are really starting to be shiny. It'll bloom and make it looks like it's a little bit glowing, and that's going to be affected, like I said, by the specular values and how hot the highlights are in the first place. So that can be nice to adjust and tweak and try and get it looking again a little bit more the way you want. Another one further down under rendering features is ambient occlusion. If you want to turn that up, and this is a post effect, ambient occlusion is where light is occluded. Okay, so ambient light, that bounced lighting, is occluded from the corners. If you sort of look up at the roof of your room, if you don't have any direct lighting going on, it's just lit by the windows, and maybe there's blinds across that's only lighting a bit. If you look up in the corners of the room, you'll notice they go darker. Light doesn't get into the corners as much. That's what ambient occlusion is. And if we turn on ambient occlusion and I dial that up and down, you can see the corners getting a little darker as it darkens that sort of the corners of things. So again, when you're trying to do certain effects, it can help to control that. So the radius will control how much of a fall off it is, how tight it is to the corner, for how much there is. So you could dial up some ambient occlusion. It'll kind of give more definition in the corners of things. So that one can give you some interesting look and feel as well. Depth of field is another one we might want to look at. It won't work very well in this scene because the scene has, essentially no depth per se. But it can work by the where the player is, and you could have it defocused in the background. So be my guest and play around with this. And depth of field can be interesting. So you pull it way down, everything can start looking really out of focus. But it really requires a pretty large scene to make it worthwhile using. I'm not sure it's something we're going to be using. You also have to realize that some of these effects and whatnot, it's a post effect, so it can be causing slowdowns, and some of them are more expensive than others. So you may not be able to use them come next semester. But let's make our scenes look as good as we possibly can this time around. Okay, the next one we're going to look at is adding some fog, atmospheric fog, or exponential height fog. So exponential height fog does a nicer job, but we're going to take a look at atmospheric fog first. Again, expense, right? So we need to concern ourselves with this as we start moving forward. So let's drag an atmospheric fog into the scene. I don't believe this one matters where it is. I think this one can be anywhere in the scene, the atmospheric fog. And so with this in the scene now, we've got things like fog multiplier. So yep, you can fog your scene. Okay, so if you're trying to do that misty, cool atmospheric kind of feel to it, where you can't, as you look down the street, you can't quite see where you're going because it's that early morning. So you want to make sure your sky colors that kind of that early morning fog look, and the sun angle's really low, and you've color corrected to give you those oranges and stuff, a little bit kind of casting through it, and then throw a fog in, and we can go and play around with some of these density multipliers, so we can make it even more or less dense, I think. Offset scale. You'd have to sort of read on some of these. I have to play around with them to get them all to do exactly what I want. And you can see that it's making it a big difference in the scene. Now, one of the things you might want to do to make sure that you're not confusing what's doing what is turn off some of the settings like bloom, for instance, because you'll notice that bloom was actually causing some of that fogginess to happen. So we could play around with bloom to do it, but I suggest turn things off. So I just went into the post-process volume and turned off the bloom. Now I can go and set the fog multiplier up and then go back to the post process and see how that might affect the overall look and feel of our scene. So because it's essentially making the fog glow, okay, this post process volume here. So for this next one, we're going to use the exponential height fog, and it can be really cool. So this does matter where it sits in the scene, how high it is or low it is. It will change the effect and where it sits. So I'm going to put it kind of near the middle right now and just above the ground as we play around with some of these settings. So we've got the fog density, and I don't know, you can kind of see that going up and down, and I'll see if it shows, but if I push this up and down, it's kind of hard to see, but you can actually see a slight change happening to the amount of fog. Maybe if I put up and down the fall off. So yeah, with the fall off higher, you can see it's the fall off is sort of greater. So up and down will change that fogging effect happening. So you'll need to play with those two. There's also a secondary setting for some reason, but there is. I'm not quite sure why it's a secondary setting, but so you can see it can change that fall off again, so much so that with it all the way down, it's just completely fogging the scene. So I'm going to take that off. Now, what we can do with this is we can get light shafts happening, which can look really cool. And light shafts happen when light's passing through fog and then passes past objects. You're actually getting a shadowing effect in the fog. So the fog itself is being shadowed. Right now, it's not. There's none of that effect happening here. So we can go and turn on a couple of things. One, volumetric fog. So we want to turn that on, and it's still not happening where we want, but it's producing volume of fog as opposed to just sort of making the scene brighter, I guess, how that's happening. Distribution settings, extinction scales and whatnot, we can play around with these. The light scattering exponent, so how much it scatters the light and everything. Again, these things are all going to be played with. Some of them won't feel like they're doing much, but if you roll over them, it'll try and give you an idea of what's happening with them. And of course, there's always that wonderful thing called help. Type UE4 and exponential height fog, and you'll get the help files for Unreal Engine, which are usually excellent for the most part on explaining things. There's also some really good videos out there, one of them about an hour long, all about lighting things that they've done, and it's pretty amazing. So to get those light streaks going, what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our directional light and scroll on down to light shafts, light shaft occlusion. So I believe that's the one. Yes, it is. You'll notice it suddenly got darker here. So it's actually going to start giving us those light shafts. I don't know if you can see that as I move around now. You can see those light shafts coming down through objects. And you can start playing around with mask darkness. I'm not sure what that one does. I think it makes it darker, lighter in the shadow areas. So you can sort of control how much that's happening as well, and that can get you that really nice feel. It's something I've added to my scene, and it looks really nice when I put my scene together and have these light shafts coming down through everything. So you can play with the bloom tint, which of course is going to give you, color changes and whatnot. I think we need bloom brightness, light shaft bloom, and that'll get us even more kind of blooming stuff going. And if you start cranking up colors and everything, you'll start seeing colors in it subtly, but you'll start seeing them. I don't think I'm seeing anything right now. Threshold. Threshold for bloom thresholds, by the way, is how bright does an object need to be to start to bloom, okay? So I'll turn those ones back off again. So right now that's working, but that's pretty much it in a nutshell. You can control a whole bunch of cool lighting features and look at it a bit more. And of course, the other thing you can do is start adding lights where you need them. For instance, a point light somewhere if you've got a light bulb going on, sort of sitting somewhere. And again, start controlling the color of your lights, color of the skylights, color of the secondary lights that are in the scene, and it'll start to bring it alive.